Peru's National Office of Electoral Processes has finally concluded the count of ballots cast in the presidential runoff of June 6, as Peruvians continue to await the official announcement of Pedro Castillo as the winner. In Jerusalem, extremist Israeli settlers went ahead with their provocative march of flags celebrating the occupation of the city in 1967. The Palestinian resistance and authorities held a day of rage in response. Japan's ruling coalition voted down a no-confidence motion against Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga's cabinet in the House of Representatives, deflecting criticism over the government's COVID-19 response and plans to push ahead with the Tokyo Olympics. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. Peru's National Office of Electoral Processes has finally concluded the count of ballots cast in the presidential runoff of June 6, as Peruvians continue to await the official announcement of Pedro Castillo as the winner. According to the results published on the Electoral Authority's website, the candidate for the Free Peru Party, who has maintained the lead throughout the count process, secured 50.12% of the vote. Meanwhile, far-right candidate Keiko Fujimori of the Popular Force Party, and who has continued to make claims of fraud, secured 49.87% of the ballots. This represents a difference of just over 44,000 votes between the two candidates in one of the tightest presidential races in Peru's history. Presidential candidate for the Free Peru Party, Pedro Castillo, offered a briefing earlier on Tuesday where he stressed the need to wait patiently for the election results and called on foreign forces to respect the will of the Peruvian people.
Things continue to be stigmatized. Calls continue to be made in other areas to try and steal the election. But on the other hand, there will be no such thing. Things have been said before and during the campaign. The candidacy process is over. We are patiently waiting for the results, and even so, there are voices coming even from personalities who have had a wide political experience of wanting to go beyond, of wanting to make something official, the popular will of the Peruvian people. And we leave that in the hands of the population itself. On my part, I thank you.
In Colombia, the National Strike Committee announced on Tuesday the temporary suspension of weekly mass demonstrations until July 20th. According to the committee's leaders, the decision is a strategy to avoid violence and assassinations as a result of state repression against demonstrators since the beginning of the mobilizations on April 28th. The committee also called for a huge concert on July 20th to commemorate the first anniversary of the presentation of the emergency petition of demands to the national government. It was also announced that a national dialogue process will be held in which the committee expects the participation of unions, different social and political sectors, citizens and universities, among others, intended to draft several bills containing the points of the emergency statement.
For these reasons, we have decided to make a temporary interruption of the recurrent mobilizations that we have been doing on Wednesdays. This does not mean that the social mobilization in Colombia will stop. The social mobilization in Colombia will continue because the causes that have generated it are still in force.
According to local sources, a car loaded with explosives was blown up inside military facilities in the Colombian city of Cúcuta this Tuesday. Eyewitnesses said the explosion at the San Jorge Military Battalion headquarters, located in the San Rafael neighborhood of the city, occurred at around 3:30 p.m. and several ambulances arrived at the scene to take wounded soldiers for treatment. The detonation was recorded in several videos circulating on social networks. According to witnesses, a vehicle entered the military battalion and minutes later 2 blasts were heard. So far, the motives of the attack and the number of wounded are unknown. The Chilean Chamber of Deputies approved Tuesday a constitutional reform bill to reinstate mandatory voting, which seeks to tackle growing abstentionism, as was seen in the regional governor's runoff vote held on Sunday. The bill, which now passes to the Senate, required at least 93 votes to be approved. Despite the opposition of some right-wing legislators, it passed with 105 votes in favour. The issue of electoral participation was once again brought to the fore following Sunday's very low turnout, when only 19.6% of the electoral roll went to the polls. The reform bill would modify the current constitution, which establishes that suffrage is personal, equal, secret and voluntary. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Israeli right-wing extremists gathered Tuesday in Jerusalem to stage the March of Flags, celebrating the occupation of Palestine's capital in 1967. In the afternoon, the occupation forces started attacking Palestinians who gathered at the Damascus Gate in the old city of Al-Quds ahead of the march. The provocation was due to take place on May 10th, but was suspended when the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas honoured its previous warning of firing missiles over Israel to stop it. Tel Aviv responded with devastating air attacks against Gaza, killing more than 200 people. The new Israeli government, led by the ultra-nationalist Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, authorised the march within hours of taking up office. Some 2,000 soldiers were deployed to protect the illegal settlers, who waved Israeli flags and danced in front of Palestinian dwellers. Hamas and the Palestinian government called for a day of rage, rejecting both the march and Israeli occupation of their land. They warned of dire consequences if the settlers attack Muslim sacred sites. And Palestinians protested against a newly built Israeli settlement outpost called Avitar, south of Nablus in the occupied West Bank. Israeli occupation authorities are building a new road leading up to the settlement, which Palestinians said is forcing them to take longer detours to access the village.
Naftali Bennett will not be better than Netanyahu when it comes to settlements, and it is very clear through his statements that he will continue to build settlements in the lands. So whoever satisfies the settlers is the one who will head the Israeli government, and whoever comes to power in Israel will try to please the settlers in the regions. If we lost our lands and we were put in danger, our lives will not matter. I often hear the young people saying that we will remain steadfast even if we lose everything we have. Even if I lose myself, my brother, and all of my money, I will remain steadfast on this land until this settlement is removed.
Despite the difficult conditions resulting from the terrorist war and the US and European blockade, Syria managed to successfully complete the equipping of a centre specialised in blood stem cell transplants, the first of its kind in the country, to treat children with cancer. More details in the following report with our correspondent Hisham Wanas.
The centre, based at the pediatric teaching hospital in the capital Damascus, will be a hope for many children and families. This was stated by the First Lady of Syria, Asma al-Assad, during her visit to the facility, where she remarked that due to the war, circumstances and the blockade, some believed that it was impossible to complete such a center. But with determination, commitment, collaboration between institutions and teamwork, this dream became a reality.
Despite the difficult circumstances caused by the war and the blockade that prevent us from importing the necessary medicines, equipment and medical supplies, we have managed to build and equip this center, thanks to 15 years of hard work, so we can consider this achievement a major defeat of the blockade imposed on Syria and a true miracle.
Thanks to the Syrian immigrants and several entities, the unit has been equipped with the latest medical technologies and meets the highest technical standards that guarantee the best levels of prevention, sterilization and isolation, and ensure the health of sick children and the success of operations. It will provide treatment for children with leukemia, some solid cancers, hereditary blood diseases, and congenital immune deficiencies.
The center receives sick children from all over the Syrian territory and offers them medical treatment free of charge, and the patient receives the required medical care before the transplant, and after the transplant receive medical supervision that could last from 5 to 10 years.
We have trained doctors and nurses in cooperation with Iran, and now these same staff are in charge of training other doctors and nurses within the transplant facility in order to have the necessary staff for this center and in the event of opening other centers in different.
According to Damascus, the development of this center is a challenge to the unilateral European and US coercive measures, which it describes as economic terrorism and an inhuman policy towards the Syrian people, a medical achievement that, among its main features, imposes medical isolation without imposing social isolation, by having the mother present during the entire period of her child's treatment, which will help alleviate the great psychological pressure to which children are exposed during the entire period of treatment.
هشام والنوس teleSUR Damascus, Syria.
Differences between Iran and the United States to revive the 2015 nuclear deal remain, but talks are on track, the Iranian Foreign Ministry said. Although technical and legal subtleties and a number of topics remain to be solved, both countries seem determined to reach an agreement, the Iranian Foreign Ministry's spokesman said, in a repeat of what has been going on for a while now. That is, we're doing not so fine, but everything's all right. The official warned the United States not to do what former President Donald Trump used to, i.e. ruin everything. The latest meeting of the Joint Commission of the Nuclear Deal started on Saturday with the participation of representatives from China, France, Germany, Russia and the UK and Iran.
One of the important things is that the U.S. should make the decision and be aware that it does not have the same position as Iran and other 4+1 countries. The U.S. should know it violated the Iran nuclear agreement and the Resolution 2231 and now participates in talks and negotiations with attitude of a violator. Now the U.S. government should make sure to avoid repeating events of the Trump administration.
Only China could have achieved this. The United States and the European Commission agreed to a reconciliation on the 17-year-long dispute about state subsidies between Boeing and Airbus aircraft giants. The European Commission is the executive branch of the European Union. Together with a delegation from the United States, the Commission agreed that it was in their best interest to fix their differences before China comes up with the surprise from its growing aircraft manufacturing sector. The dispute has dragged on since 2004, when the United States withdrew from a 1992 aircraft subsidy pact and took the EU to the World Trade Organization, claiming Airbus had managed to equal Boeing's share of the jet market, thanks in part to subsidized government loans. The European side then countersued over what they termed unfair research and development support and subsidised tax incentives for Boeing. The agreement came about in a meeting between US and European trade representatives on Tuesday at a bilateral summit.
So I think we have an enormous opportunity if we think in terms of these changes.
On Tuesday, China reacted to the loaded anti-Chinese rhetoric at the Group of Seven and NATO summits this week. Beijing's message is simple: don't interfere in our internal affairs. The Group of Seven major capitalist economies met in England this weekend, concluding that they must do all they can to stop China from becoming stronger. They also told the Chinese government what it must do in its territories of Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Taiwan. The day after, on Monday, they flew over the Channel to Brussels and, in the context of the North Atlantic Military Treaty, declared China their top military foe. No wonder Beijing did not like it. Speaking at a daily briefing, the Foreign Ministry spokesperson Xiao Lixiang described the G7 announcement as a defamation and a way of interfering in the country's internal affairs. What they're trying to do is artificial confrontation, Xiao said.
The communique of the Group of Seven summit mentioned China-related issues, deliberately slandering China on issues related to Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Taiwan, and interfering in China's internal affairs. This is a serious violation of the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and the trend of the times of peaceful development and win-win cooperation. It exposes the bad intention of the US and a few other countries to artificially create confrontation and widen differences and contradictions.
United States President Joe Biden arrived in Geneva on Tuesday ahead of his first summit with Vladimir Putin, as tensions between Moscow and Washington stand at their highest in years. Biden's visit to Geneva is the last part of his first foreign trip as president, after mending relations with Washington's closest allies during the Group of Seven and North Atlantic Treaty Organization summits in Britain and Brussels. Wednesday's face-to-face talks between the two heads of state are the first between US and Russian leaders since 2018, when Putin met Biden's predecessor Donald Trump in Helsinki. Wednesday's summit comes as both nations find themselves in confrontation over a long list of disputes, from cyber attacks to election meddling. Expectations for the talks are low. with officials on both sides repeatedly saying the two leaders are unlikely to find much common ground. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. This Tuesday, Japan's ruling coalition voted down a no-confidence motion against Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga's cabinet in the House of Representatives, deflecting criticism over the government's COVID-19 response and plans to push ahead with the Tokyo Olympics. 4 opposition parties submitted the motion after the Liberal Democratic Party and its junior coalition partner, Komeito, rejected the demand to extend the current parliamentary session. The Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan and 3 other opposition parties say the 3-month extension is necessary to continue the debate on ways to contain the coronavirus pandemic and whether the Tokyo Olympics, set to begin on July 23rd, can be held safely. Though Japan has not suffered the damages of the other nations due to the coronavirus, its slowness in vaccinating citizens and patchy response have dented support for the Japanese PM.
Over 5 weeks until the opening.
South Africa's government is tightening restrictions, including extending a curfew and limiting alcohol sales to control the spread of COVID-19 as infections surged in the past week. There will be a curfew from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. and non-essential establishments like restaurants, bars and fitness centres will close by 9 p.m. to allow their employees and customers to get home before the curfew starts. All gatherings will be limited to a maximum of 50 people indoors and 100 outdoors. President Cyril Ramaphosa also announced plans to increase vaccination from 150 to 250,000 people a day as soon as possible. By Tuesday, Africa's hardest hit nation had recorded more than 1.76 million coronavirus cases and over 58,000 COVID deaths. Senegal's army has captured several rebel bases in the West African state's southern Casamance region as part of a fresh push against separatists launched last month. A commander in the region said that 2 soldiers were wounded in the operations on the border with Guinea-Bissau, which began on May 31st. One of Africa's oldest ongoing conflicts, the fighting in Casamance has claimed thousands of lives since it first broke out in December 1982 between the government of Senegal and the Movement of Democratic Forces of Casamance. The movement has called for the independence of the region, whose population is religiously and ethnically distinct from the rest of Senegal. Home to 1.9 million people, Casamance was once among Portugal's colonies in West Africa, along with what is today Guinea-Bissau. But the region is now located within the former French colony of Senegal. At least 13 soldiers were killed by a terrorist attack in the Somalian capital, Mogadishu, at the entrance of an army training camp. According to the authorities, the perpetrator was dressed as a recruit and detonated a vest of explosives he was wearing. The attack was claimed by the Al-Shabaab group on social media. The General Dagabadan military training camp takes its name from a Somalian who died during an Al-Shabaab attack on a hotel in the capital. The camp's used by the European Union as part of its training mission for Somalia's armed forces. The UN World Food Programme is providing food assistance to hard-to-reach areas in Ethiopia's Tigray region, which has been racked by conflict, with UNICEF warning that tens of thousands of malnourished children risk dying in the region as famine spreads. Some 350,000 people in the region are facing famine conditions, while 2 million more are just a step away from those extreme conditions, the programme warned. It's also reported that over 90% of the more than 5 million people living in Tigray need emergency food aid, for which the agency has urgently appealed for more than $200 million to scale up its response. International aid organisations have complained repeatedly that they're being denied access to the region by Ethiopian forces and troops from neighbouring Eritrea as the conflict with the Tigray People's Liberation Front continues.
So this is a region that even prior to the conflict has been affected by shocks in recent years. We had the desert locust this past year, hailstorms, some pockets of the region that are already chronically affected by drought. It means that this is an area that's already a bit on the edge. So now with the conflict, the disruption of health systems, the collapse of markets in many areas, the inability to plant today because people don't have access to seeds, fertilizer, or the security to be able to plant, means that for WFP, the #1 priority is going to continue to be that humanitarian assistance until the situation allows people to resume their livelihoods activities and meet their own food security needs.
In France, a vessel polluted at least 16 kilometres of Breton coasts in the middle of the construction of a wind farm. French customs authorities announced that the ship Aileus, belonging to the Dutch company Van Oord, has caused a slick about 16 kilometres long and 2.8 wide. The vessel, which has been drilling for the wind farm it's building in the Bay of Saint-Brieuc since the beginning of May, reported on Monday morning that it suffered a leak of 100 litres of oil. The Atlantic Maritime Prefecture decided to send an assistance vessel, the Sapir, with material to deal with the pollution. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. Plus you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.